Tonight, 4 days out from the Territory election, a call for parties to reveal how much their pledges will cost. Also tonight, the majority of Victoria's second deadly wave of COVID cases linked to one family. Is Australian wine the next export in China's firing line? Fears the multi-million-dollar industry could be hit hard by tariffs. And pie in the sky. The heat is on to find the best in Australia. Good evening, Eleni Roussos with ABC News. Less than 4 days out from the Northern Territory election, the Chief Minister is calling on the other major parties to put a price on their election promises. Labor says its promises don't need to be separately costed because the funds were part of their most recent budget update.
Good morning, how are you?
A few days out from final polling day, voters were given some familiar sound bites to chew on.
Saving lives and saving jobs. The home improvement scheme has been a huge job saver.
And it is the Labor government, the Gunner Labor government, who have racked up $8.2 billion debt and have nothing to show for it.
There were also some familiar backdrops and criticisms of stimulus spending delays.
When those invoices are going into the department, they are taking 4 to 6 weeks to pay.
I have not been getting paid in the time frame that they've given us, and cash flow is a bit hard at the moment due to Corona.
As the country Liberals leader cast her vote, the Chief Minister was pushing for the opposing parties to price their election promises.
Come clean. Tell Territorians what you've promised. You should be able to add it up. Now, if you can't add up, you can't govern.
Treasury says it wrote to all major parties offering to cost their election promises, and last Friday was the deadline for a response. But yesterday, the country Liberals leader said they were still waiting for Treasury to get in touch.
We're not surprised that we haven't been approached yet by Treasury.
That tune changed today, with the party confirming they'd meet a deadline extension of tomorrow afternoon given to them by Treasury.
We have always said we will put in our costings and ensure that Treasury take a look at that information.
Territory Alliance has previously promised to take up this offer, but Treasury says it's yet to hear from the party on this. Labor says its election commitments don't need to be separately costed.
I said to you months ago that don't expect to see any flashy promises from us this election.
Labor says recent promises like those on social media about building new houses in northeast Arnhem Land are not in fact new commitments, and that they were accounted for in last month's budget update. Felicity James, ABC News.
Ahead of polling day, we've been asking what matters most to you this Territory election. In Alice Springs, businesses say crime is a real problem, and they want to know what the major parties will do about it. We had a look at the issue and what solutions are on offer.
Publican Di Leckel has learned she can't cut corners on security. Her Alice Springs business has been broken into 3 times in the last month, and many more times over the years.
I wouldn't even like to hazard a guess at how many we've had. I mean, there was one week a few years ago where we were hit 7 times in 6 days. We've had every window broken in the premise. We've had them come through the roof.
She says she loves Alice Springs, but break-ins and security measures have cost her business hundreds of thousands of dollars.
It takes a huge toll because, you know, you can't concentrate on all sorts of things. You can't go home at night and know that you're going to go to bed at whatever time and that you are going to actually get a full 8-hour sleep. You just don't have that guarantee.
Di Leckel isn't alone. Business owners and residents alike say that crime, especially property crime, is getting worse in Alice Springs. Police say that crime is actually down over the decade and down over this time last year. But police statistics show that Alice Springs' property crime rate was trending upwards again over the last 5 years, with the rate of commercial break-ins, house break-ins, property damage offences, and total property offences higher in the 12 months to May 2020 than in the 12 months to 2015.
Unfortunately, one of the things with property crime, though, is that with recidivist offenders, based on their behaviour, that can change our property crime as far as when we experience peaks.
Police say that doesn't mean that policies aren't working. Commander Laidler says alcohol restrictions and youth outreach officers have been part of the solution, alongside targeted investigation strategies.
We monitor recidivist offenders closely, but we also have our property crime unit, which is staffed with experienced detectives, and they're solely focused on investigating property crime.
Miss Leckel knows what she would like to see.
I think there has to be a more bipartisan approach to crime and crime prevention and what we do with recidivist offenders.
Justice experts say policymakers need to be careful, and that being tough on crime isn't the answer.
Young people offending on bail is not the offending or whether they're breaching conditions of bail. The issue is why are they in a position to commit these offences, and how do we ensure that doesn't happen? Locking them up doesn't do that. It doesn't do anything.
So, what are the parties saying they'll do? Territory Alliance is promising a youth curfew and a new court with more community involvement. The CLP says that it will strengthen bail laws by removing the presumption for bail for what it considers repeat offenders. Labor says it's sticking to its diversion programs to get young people especially back on track. It has also toughened its stance of late and is now hinting at harsher penalties for property crime. There's no bipartisanship here, not when there are votes to be won. Samantha Johnsher, ABC News, Alice Springs.
A Darwin inquest into the death of a murderer who was accused of eating parts of his victim has found he received a high standard of care whilst in custody. David Kevin Loader died from cancer in January, almost 20 years after he was sentenced to life in prison for murder. Loader was found guilty of killing a friend at a camp in Wagite in 2001. The court heard during his trial he'd boasted to other inmates about killing a man and eating parts of his leg and penis. A mandatory inquest was held as Loader died in custody. The coroner today made no recommendations and praised Top End Health for its appropriate care of the prisoner. Victoria has recorded its lowest daily number of new COVID-19 cases in a month, but at the same time, fewer people are getting tested. The Department of Health has confirmed nearly all of Victoria's second wave stemmed from one Melbourne hotel. The Hotel Quarantine Inquiry has heard more than 90% of current cases can be traced back to one family staying at a Ridges hotel in May.
Victoria's deadly second wave started with a family of 4 who arrived at this Melbourne hotel on the 9th of May.
The first case among a member of staff clustered genomically, which means it was within the same transmission network.
On that day, Victoria had just 10 new cases of coronavirus and community transmission was all but stamped out. When the family tested positive, it was moved to the Ridges Hotel, and 10 days later, 3 hotel workers tested positive.
Approximately 90% or more of COVID-19 infections in Victoria can be traced to the Ridges Hotel.
The remaining cases began with 3 travellers who stayed at another quarantine hotel in June, the Stanford Plaza. But exactly how the virus spread into the community remains a mystery, and epidemiologists can't pinpoint just how or when staff became infected.
I'm not in a position to be able to confirm or rule in or rule out or provide you with a view on that. That's exactly why we've got a separate, properly resourced process to give us those answers.
The inquiry is also looking for answers to why private security guards were used in Victorian hotels while other states used the Defence Force. At a Senate hearing in Canberra, Defence officials said all larger states were offered 100 ADF personnel.
Was the offer that was made to Victoria any different to the offers made to Queensland or New South Wales?
No, the offers to the states and territories were the same.
Victoria recorded 222 infections today, the lowest daily case number in a month. But a 17% drop in the number of people getting tested in the past week has authorities pleading for more people to get swabbed.
It seems logical that there would be less testing, but not this much less.
A big problem for the Victorian government has been connecting with marginalised communities where this virus has run rampant. The inquiry heard today it needs a better understanding of all communities to bring this virus under control.
You need people who are trusted and who know those communities in order to really engage well and get the right information.
Bridget Rollison, ABC News, Melbourne.
A Commonwealth agency has conceded its officers failed to conduct routine health checks on Ruby Princess passengers before letting them disembark the ship in March. The admission came in a parliamentary inquiry trying to untangle the chain of events that sparked Australia's first major COVID-19 outbreak, resulting in at least 28 deaths. Political editor Andrew Probyn explains.
The Ruby Princess set sail from Sydney's shores months ago, but the COVID catastrophe she brought is still sending ripples through government. A special commission of inquiries heaped blame on New South Wales Health for wrongly assessing the ship as low risk, despite more than a dozen passengers displaying flu-like symptoms.
Can I now apologise unreservedly?
But New South Wales health officials weren't even there when the Ruby Princess came dockside on that fateful day in March. The ship instead met by officers from two Commonwealth agencies, Border Force and Agriculture.
The national protocol was not followed.
The Agriculture boss, admitting a biosecurity officer relied entirely on the New South Wales health advice and didn't do her own checks.
That impacted very severely on many people.
Border Force has never had legislative authority over human health at ports, but a senior officer showed strong interest in sick passengers isolated in their cabins.
He was, I think, simply trying to be helpful.
The officer sought and received lab forms filled out by the ship's doctor, but misinterpreted them, thinking they showed the isolated passengers had tested negative to coronavirus, when in fact they'd tested negative to the flu. After assuring superiors the isolated passengers had tested negative, he gave the go-ahead for them to go straight out, according to the government's own submission.
If he'd understood that the COVID results were still outstanding, what would he have done differently?
Well, that's a very hypothetical question, Senator, because they're not.
You just raised it, though.
Had, of course, the officer become concerned for any reason, then they would have made a phone call. The issue would have been elevated if there were concerns.
The Special Commission cleared Border Force of responsibility for the Ruby Princess disaster. But had the ABF officer properly understood the lab form and then sought advice, as Michael Outram says he would have, the isolated passengers might not have been allowed to disembark. This doesn't absolve New South Wales Health for its catastrophic errors, but it was among a litany of mistakes that led to 11 feverish and infectious people carrying the virus across the country. Andrew Probyn, ABC News, Canberra.
Australian authorities have seized up to $250 million worth of cocaine off the New South Wales coast. 1 tonne of cocaine was offloaded from a Chinese trawler onto a small fishing boat near Lord Howe Island. 3 men had to be tested for coronavirus before being charged in Sydney.
Even though we're going through a global pandemic, organised crime groups continue to attempt to exploit our borders.
Police say they had a tip-off from New Zealand authorities. Beijing's on the trade warpath again, this time targeting Australian winemakers. It's given formal notice of its intention to slap tariffs on almost every wine bottle entering the Chinese market from this country. Here's National Affairs correspondent Greg Jennett.
And I think Australian wines pretty much tick the boxes that people are looking for.
Slickly marketed and sloshed by the young and affluent.
China is this huge diversity of market.
Australian wines have hit their mark as the high-priced, premium tipple of Chinese choice. So much so they're worth more than $1 billion a year, representing 1/3 of all Australian wine exports and growing. Winemakers in 4 states depend utterly on China, accounting for almost half their sales. Those shipments are now looking shaky. Beijing's Commerce Ministry's told Canberra it's launching dual investigations, one into alleged dumping at cut-down prices, the other claiming Australia effectively subsidises winemaking.
There is no dumping. There is no subsidy. There's only world-class wine priced as it should be at world-class prices.
The threat of a tariff hike landed a barrel blow on the biggest exporter, Treasury Wine Estates.
Of some of the most recognised and awarded brands in the world.
Its share price took a double-digit dive, a portent of a poisoned trade relationship set to get worse.
It's a devastating decision that could be catastrophic for the industry.
Whether niche exporters like Greg Corra or veteran industry watcher Peter Simic.
Why would you do this?
All are perplexed by the logic and bracing for the consequences.
There would be a lot of pain, there's no question about that, for the short term. But in the long term, we're very resilient in Australia.
Beijing's actions fit with the prophetic warnings of its ambassador to Canberra, who at the start of the year named beef and wine as two products his people might suddenly lose their taste for. Australia regards it as economic coercion. Barley growers are already copping it, and barring any retreat, by this time next year, winemakers will too.
We find these suggestions deeply troubling and quite perplexing.
Unpalatable and in all likelihood unstoppable if the Chinese remain determined. Greg Jennett, ABC News, Canberra.
Still to come this hour, the solar panel sales tactics stinging consumers.
They do wear you down in the end and force you into a decision.
We had to sign on the day or miss out on the deal.
Unsolicited selling means that people will feel they can't say no.
Plus, why coronavirus could spell the end of school sport. That's coming up.
A federal inquiry has heard the disability community was overlooked during early planning for COVID-19. Witnesses have told the Disability Royal Commission they went without food, medication and essential support. Disability Affairs reporter Naz Campanella has the story.
Victorian woman Nicole Lee experienced a decade of violence at the hands of a former partner. Now an advocate, she came to the Royal Commission to highlight the struggles faced by some women during lockdown.
You're no longer in a space where you're away from the home where it is safe to make a phone call like that, where somebody isn't going to overhear. So it means that phone calls become, very dangerous or, just not able to happen whatsoever.
36 witnesses will give evidence at the Disability Royal Commission. While the pandemic initially delayed hearings, COVID-19 and its impact on the disability community is now the subject.
It's a challenge, but we'll have to do it, and we'll use the technology in order to do it and to give people with disability their voice.
Tammy Milne from northern Tasmania was left for days without essential services when a support worker was exposed to COVID-19.
It invaded into our home without our consent, if you like. We had no control over it coming in because potentially it could come in with the support worker.
The pandemic was particularly difficult for the deaf community. Some had no idea what was happening.
My husband is the only deaf person in that aged care home. Everyone else there can hear. So communication for him is a really big barrier.
The Commission also heard that the disability community was left behind in early planning for the pandemic. There was a lack of PPE and groceries and essential items became expensive and hard to find. The hearing continues until Friday. Naz Campanella, ABC News.
There are fresh claims tonight that some universities are underpaying staff, with revelations that tutors are being told to skim read student essays to meet impossible marking rates. 5 tertiary institutions may be called to give evidence at a Senate inquiry following an ABC investigation. And now 5 more universities may be caught up in disputes. Here's National Education reporter Connor Duffy.
Some of Australia's universities have a secret. Their promise of a world-class education for students appears to be built on a workforce of underpaid casual staff. Until this semester, Elise Fenton was a course coordinator. She estimates she's owed $28,000.
A third of all the work I did in the last 18 months was unpaid work.
After 13 years, she was among the casual academics quietly let go during the pandemic. She still worries for her students.
So I have heard colleagues being told to skim read student assignments or to just read the introduction and the conclusion of an essay.
It's a sector-wide problem, but many casual tutors continue to do the work without being properly paid. Tutors like Karen Douglas have taken Melbourne's RMIT to the Fair Work Commission today after the School of Management halved marking time to 10 minutes a paper.
There's an exploitative employment model there that casuals are using their own time to continue to provide really high quality standards.
This sort of wage theft is not just what we see in the news like George Calombaris.
An ABC investigation has revealed 4 universities are making or have made repayments to staff. A 5th is being audited. Now staff at another 5 universities say they're being underpaid. That's a quarter of the sector. Already tens of millions of dollars has been committed to be repaid, and some staff are warning that without major changes, the campus dreams of Australian students will suffer. Connor Duffy, ABC News.
The Democratic Party in the United States has held an age-old convention in a very unconventional way. The 4-day event, which kicks off Joe Biden's presidential campaign, had to be held online. North America correspondent Catherine Diss reports.
We the people of the United States.
We the people call the 48th Quadrennial Democratic National Convention to order.
A convention like no other. No crowds, no balloons, no fireworks. For the first time in history, millions coming together online. Dozens delivering video messages, the former First Lady pulling no punches.
Donald Trump is the wrong president for our country. He has had more than enough time to prove that he can do the job, but he is clearly in over his head.
As Democrats addressed the nation from the safety of their homes, Donald Trump departed the capital for the battleground states of Wisconsin and Minnesota.
Because the only way we're going to lose this election is if the election is rigged. Remember that.
In a break with political tradition, the president sought to steal Joe Biden's limelight, undertaking a whirlwind tour of 3 rallies.
Nero fiddled while Rome burned. Trump golfs.
It wasn't just Joe Biden's former opponents pledging allegiance, but also disaffected Republicans crossing the aisle to support Team Blue.
A lifelong Republican.
A lifelong Republican.
I've been a long-standing Republican, and I'm telling you, you got to vote for Joe Biden.
The Democrats' launch was framed around the 3 crises gripping the country: the coronavirus pandemic, the economic downturn, and the fight for racial equality, as the party sought to contrast its candidate from the president. Donald Trump will take the stage at the Republican convention next week. Catherine Diss, ABC News, Washington.
In finance, the local share market closed higher today despite some disappointing profit results, and the Australian dollar is above 72 US cents. Here's Alan Kohler.
Well, an interesting bunch of results today. Coles has been having a ball with everyone eating at home instead of going out. Sales up 7%, booze sales up 20%, and dividend up 14.6%, but the market thought it would have been better. Westpac said it won't be paying a second half dividend at all, which was a bit of a shock to investors. And BHP rode the iron ore wave to a near $8 billion profit, but it cut the dividend, which was also a bit of a shock. Apart from that, Cochlear shares jumped, even though the company reported a loss because of a $400 million legal bill for an unsuccessful patent defence, which was a bit of a bugger, really. And Treasury Wine Estates got slammed because China announced an anti-dumping inquiry into imported wine. In New York, the Nasdaq hit a new record high and the S&P 500 got to within a bee's digit of its record. And commodities were all strong. Iron ore, gold and base metals all up a fair bit. The Reserve Bank's minutes of the last board meeting came out today, and the main revelation was that the government's fiscal stimulus would add about 4% to GDP in the year just ended and 5% for the year we're in now. Now here's a chart of the stimulus so far compared with what was done in the GFC. So it's $238 billion in total this time, including the states, compared with $75 billion back then. And this one, of course, isn't reckless. The Australian dollar zoomed above 72 US cents today because the US dollar fell. And finally, APRA put out its quarterly health insurance data today, and it turns out hospital treatment claims fell 13% versus the March quarter to $3.3 billion, which isn't that surprising because a lot of elective surgery was stopped. But I guess it'll all still happen eventually, so the health insurers should enjoy the lull while it lasts. And that's finance.
When too much footy is never enough, Darwin will host 2 major AFL games this weekend. Players from the AFLW Gold Coast Suns took to the field in Nightcliff this afternoon to share skills with some young footy players. The men's team will face Carlton on Friday night before the Dreamtime match between the Tigers and the Bombers on Saturday. It'll be a chance for local footy fans to see some of their heroes in person.
It's one of the things that I love most about footy is to see how much the kids enjoy it and see them aspire to be AFLW players especially. It's great.
Organisers say the interstate players are following strict COVID safety protocols, including coronavirus tests twice a week and a ban on social gatherings. Every year, bakers across the nation vie for the award of Australia's Best Pie. Despite the pandemic, this year the Baking Association of Australia expects 1,700 entries in its annual pie and pasty competition. And not even border closures will stop the pies coming hot out of the oven at the Sydney event.
It's a national delicacy, and to hold the title of Australia's Best Pie is an accolade bakers strive for across the country.
It's not just about the feeling. Pastry play a big part of making the good pie, so we have to get 100% right to make the best pie and to be a champion.
At Kyneton's Country Cob Bakery, an hour north of Melbourne, Chan Kun is preparing for the 2020 Baking Association of Australia competition. The 2-time pie champion won't let a pandemic hold him back from the chance of a 3rd consecutive win. His best bet this year is a creamy lobster and mushroom pie with flavours influenced by his Cambodian heritage.
You do something, you want to be the best.
The event was meant to be held in Melbourne, but the lockdown has seen it relocated to Sydney. With state borders closed, the precious cargo from more than 400 bakeries across Australia can no longer be hand-delivered.
We will have to send them up frozen. I would definitely rather have them under my arm in an esky, delivering them myself.
We make sure that we unpack them correctly, store them correctly, and we see really great results from those people.
Based on the Bellarine Peninsula, Rolling Pin Bakery took out the 2013 title.
It's a jumbo chunky coming out.
For their jumbo chunky beef pie and have their fingers crossed this year.
When we win something like this, it's validation that we're on the right track.
The judges will deliver their results next week, but it's keeping the customers coming back that remains the true hallmark of Australia's Best Pie. Sarah Jane Bell, ABC News.
Time for the weather now, and tonight's pick, Night 4 Descends, was taken by Kate Carter. It was another warm day across the Territory with very dry conditions over East Arnhem Land. It was a partly cloudy day in the far north. Darwin reached a top of 31 degrees, hot again in Jabiru, 36. Temperatures were above average in the south, 29 in Alice Springs, 35 in Tennant Creek. In Katherine it hit 36 and 31 in Nhulunbuy. Around Australia today, it was a cold start in the southeast, reaching a top of just 14 in Canberra, 16 in Adelaide and Sydney topped 25. On the satellite, skies are mostly clear over the Territory with some cloud about the Daly district. A trough over the Territory is bringing warm air to central Australia, and another burst of dry air should reach the top end this weekend. Interstate tomorrow, it'll be cold and wet in most capitals, a top of just 9 degrees in Canberra, windy in Sydney, 21. To our north, storms again in Singapore and Bangkok, a cloudy 30 degrees in Jakarta, and sunny weather for Dili. Back home, and it'll be a little cooler in the south tomorrow, a low of 8 tonight in Alice Springs, 23 tomorrow, 26 in Yuendamu and 32 in Tennant Creek. It'll be warm and dry in the northeast, 36 again in Katherine, a cloudy 31 in Maningrida and 32 in Onurugu. Staying warm and humid in Darwin, 32 tomorrow for the city and Wadeye, 34 on the Tiwis, hot again in Jabiru, 36. There'll be a 7-metre high tide at 6:45 in the morning and another big high in time for sunset. Sunrise will be around 7 a.m. and you can catch the sun go down at 6:43. And looking ahead for Darwin, days will be humid for the rest of the week. Nights getting under 20 degrees again next week. In Alice Springs, a cool change will move through tomorrow, becoming warm again late in the weekend. And for the latest on the NT election, head to our website, abc.net.au/NT votes. Stay with us now. Lee Sales is up next with 7:30.
Hello and welcome to 7:30. Tonight, the solar panel sales tactic